I'm from a family of 5. I've got 2 older brothers, Sean and Stephen, and then me, and then there's my 2 younger sisters, Kerry and Natalie was the baby of the family. She's always been a social butterfly. You know, even when she was at school, she was the kid that always had loads of friends.
At just 16, Natalie decides to follow in her family's footsteps.
When Natalie left school, she went into the Navy. She was only in for a short time. It really wasn't for her.
Whilst serving, she falls in love, gets married, and has a baby, Kirsty.
When Natalie had Kirsty, it was very traumatic. We nearly lost Natalie and Kirsty during the birth. And Natalie had really serious postnatal depression that just wasn't picked up on.
Before long, the marriage is over and Natalie decides to move home.
It was really, really sad to hear that actually had they had more support, things might have actually been very different for their relationship because they just didn't understand what was going on. Natalie moved back to be near my mum and to have that support from my mum. My mum and Natalie always had a very, very, very close relationship.
In February 2005, Natalie and Kirsty duly move into their new home.
I'm pretty sure at the time her life kind of just revolved around me, you know, making sure I was okay, going to school, you know. It was quite simple, like we had our everyday routine. I'd go to school and she'd go to work. We just lived in a little flat together. You know, it suited us because it was just us 2.
But soon, 2 will become 3. Detectives will one day learn that Paul is 12 years older than Natalie. She's swept away by him.
It's a very vivid memory for some reason. I remember when I first met him when I was very, very young. He brought flowers for my mum and a present for me. I can't remember what it was.
He came across as, you know, being this perfect guy.
When we first met him, he had like a brand new Audi TT and, you know, and obviously my mum thought that was really cool.
He was some sort of exec with the toy company. He was involved in their purchasing and so he had a really good job. He had a lovely home. He came across as being very funny and he came across as being quite likeable.
He started coming over quite frequently.
In the early days, she was definitely smitten by him, absolutely in the early days. But obviously that changed.
Despite her hopes, there are a couple of red flags about Paul.
Within a few months of dating, there's an incident where Natalie receives a text message saying happy birthday from her ex.
He grabbed her phone, launched it at her head. In a rage, he threw her on the bed and put his right hand around her throat.
Injured and terrified, Natalie begs Paul to get her help.
She asked him to call an ambulance or take her to A&E. Eventually, he agreed to take her to A&E, where he told her if she told them what he'd done, he would kill her.
When Paul throws the mobile phone at her head over that text message that her ex sent, she does report to the police, but not immediately. And when asked, you know, why he didn't report immediately, Natalie reported that Paul had said, if you tell anyone, I'll kill you. The next day, Paul comes to the house, threatens to kick the door down, and Natalie again rings the police. She reports that, but by the time the police get there, he's already gone. A few days later, he comes and tries to talk to her through the letterbox. So, you know, that intimidation or whatever that was, that continued.
Paul had had other relationships. It was a very similar story where he'd threatened at least one of them to kill them before. He's a very controlling, manipulative person.
But Natalie doesn't know about his history of violence. Just a few months after meeting him, she decides to take a risk that Paul really is the charming, successful guy she first fell for. She and daughter Kirsty move in with him.
From that, it seems that maybe there were positive elements of this relationship, or maybe she wanted to be with him, or she thought that the future was going to be okay. Maybe he said he was going to change.
They were getting married, the church was booked, the venue was booked, she had the dress.
Everyone is getting ready for the big day. Her family may have concerns, but they support Natalie's decision.
And then I just got his phone call to say he cancelled everything. He hadn't said anything, he hadn't given a reason why, he just cancelled everything. She was absolutely devastated. The wedding dress sat at my mum's for I don't know how long. I said to her, Natalie, you just need to get rid of it. You're looking at something and wishing for something that you know is not going to happen, so just get rid of it.
Despite the weddings not going ahead, in September 2007, Natalie changes her name by default to Hemming, which is Paul's surname.
She used his name because of the children. It's as simple as that.
In 2010, Natalie becomes pregnant with her and Paul's first child.
He became a very nasty person really quickly, like he'd just switch, like, instantly. He'd send me to bed without dinner and things. He'd make me stand in the naughty corner for a long time. Overnight, on a school night, was the longest time I'd spent there. I can't even remember what I did, but that was what he did to me sometimes. Yeah, it was horrible. He'd stay awake all night just to make sure I stood there and stayed there as well. If he could see that I was like slumped up against the wall, he'd like smack me either like on the back of the legs or the back of the head and make sure I stood up straight again.
The 17th of May 2013, Natalie's eldest daughter goes to a neighbour and tells the neighbour, Daddy's hitting Mummy, and the neighbour is the one to report it.
I think I waited outside for about an hour, and I could still hear all the shouting and stuff going on inside. And then she came back, the next door neighbour, and she rang the police.
When the police arrive, Natalie realises she needs to remove her children from the home.
I remember the time when she left him and we came up here, and we lived in Joanne's old house.
We had a house up here that was empty, so I just said, look, let's just get her up here, get her away from it. I think when she moved up here, she was tired. I think she was really tired, and I think she was frightened. She was sort of making headway into moving forward, but then he followed.
I remember the first time he came up, I was terrified. I was thinking, like, please don't let him in. Just don't, like, it's not worth it. Like, you could tell he was like angry, but he was trying to hide it so that she'd believe it. And at first my mum didn't fall for it, but eventually she gave in.
I walked in the house and I just knew straight away he'd been up, because I could smell the dog. I just said, why has he been here?
He'd make all these promises to my mum saying, oh, we'll do this, oh, we'll move house, we'll get a bigger house, you can get a better job so you can have nicer things, you know. The kids will get to do all these kinds of things, like all the sports clubs that they want. He'd make all these empty promises to her and then never fulfill it.
She didn't tell me, she just left. She didn't say anything. I literally went round to the house and the house was empty. I was gutted, I was absolutely gutted.
Natalie does try to change her life.
She got a job at the Mercedes-Benz garage in Milton Keynes.
Paul doesn't want her to take the job. In fact, he actually offers her money to not take the job and instead to take money from him each month so that she can stay at home and not work.
She was totally different. She was laughing and joking, and she had that sort of real sort of spark back again.
It gives her financial independence, it gives her social independence that she hasn't had for a long time. It does mean, though, that from his point of view, he's lost some control.
That was the beginning of the end. You know, she told him that was it, they were finished, they were done, they were sleeping in separate rooms.
But even though for her that relationship is completely over, they've separated, that doesn't mean that Paul was ready to let go of his control.
Natalie, though, isn't safe yet.
She's still living in the same house as Paul, And what we know is that, he's still checking her phone, he's still monitoring her.
Natalie is blossoming outside of their relationship. With her newfound confidence, she meets someone new.
I think my mum and this guy from work started going on dates and things. He found out and he was not happy.
It was likely that he knew about that because he was checking her phone the whole time.
After a work night out, the two check into a hotel.
Natalie had arranged to go out with work colleagues and that my mum was looking after the children. The youngest didn't settle, so my mum had to call and he had to come and pick up the youngest.
He saw Natalie's car near Margaret's property. They have a conversation about where Natalie may be.
He becomes angry, he's thinking about where is she, why isn't she here with the kids?
The next morning, Natalie is seen leaving a hotel with her date. They appear happy.
In the afternoon, Natalie and the children return from her mum's back to the house that she's sharing with Paul. And he must have been stewing on that, waiting for her to get home.
I remember the night that it happened, when I last saw her, they just had a big argument and it was bedtime and he was saying to us, come downstairs, say goodnight to mum, all that stuff. And I did, and I went down and she was sat on the couch and she had a blanket around her, but I could tell she'd been crying because her eyes were puffy and she was sniffing and stuff. We went to bed, everything was normal, I didn't hear them shouting again.
Please, Suzanne speaking, how can I help?
Yes, my love. My daughter's been missing for 48 hours. We have just been up to Milton Keynes to her partner, and he says he doesn't know where she is.
Okay.
It's worrying me because it's not like her.
So, what's the specific concern that's caused you to call the police?
Him.
Natalie hasn't been heard from in 3 days.
But what's telling in this case is the initial call from Margaret Hammond, Natalie's mother. And when she's asked why she's concerned, she says him. She says the words him. She was significantly concerned about what he was capable of. The officers then attended the house, and whilst there they became concerned. Paul was being evasive in his answers to the officers.
How would you describe your relationship at the moment?
At the moment, it's all right.
It's now 4 days since anyone has seen mother of three, Natalie Hemming.
What is key in a missing person inquiry is proof of life inquiries. So things like mobile phone, bank usage. For people, we all leave electronic footprints these days, and what was key in this case was Natalie had no footprint anywhere.
I think everybody knew. It was nobody was saying it, but everybody knew, because everybody knew Natalie and knew how important the children were to her, and the fact that she just wouldn't have just left the children.
I knew they were looking for her, yeah. And I did know after I went in for my police interview that he was a suspect.
Paul, where do you believe Natalie to be?
I have no idea.
He offers police an alternative explanation to her disappearance.
He says Natalie came back home on the Sunday afternoon, which we know is correct. And then during that evening, that Natalie had disclosed to him that she'd been raped by the work colleague.
But police are able to quickly dismiss a claim for which there's no truth.
There's a text message sent from Natalie to her friend saying that she'd had a great night.
Oh my God, amazing. We had sex 3 times. We say those are not the words of a lady who has been raped.
Investigators turn their attention to his whereabouts on the night that Natalie goes missing. Hemming claims to have been in bed. Again, police prove him wrong.
Key to this is the car, the S-Max as I call it, which is Paul's car, that night had been out for around two hours. It activated ANPR, and actually Paul said to the officers that he went to bed early that night.
What you're saying is that I have killed my partner. I have disposed of her body. I have tidied the house, made it look pristine, managed to cook them dinner and many more things without them knowing.
That's exactly what we're saying, Paul.
Impossible.
There was a rug that was removed from the property. That rug was a red rug. There was red fibres found in the rear of the S-Max.
And the final piece of evidence comes from Natalie's young son.
He went downstairs when he heard the noise and peeked through a gap in the door. He thought it was Mum being sick. He said it was really loud, like thunder, and it sounded like 3 glasses smashing. He describes the big red rug in the lounge as being missing. Have you removed a rug from your house recently?
I'm coming.
Later that day, I made the decision to take the case to the CPS, who charged him with the murder of Natalie. One concern of mine was clearly a trial generally happens within 6 months of someone being remanded in custody. So actually, crucially, we really needed to find Natalie, and that time was ticking. The search was unprecedented. The geography was so significant. It was hundreds of square miles. So we utilised search specialists, not just from our force, but from neighbouring forces. We utilised dogs, helicopter. As you would expect, significant numbers of officers on the ground searching.
It takes 3 weeks of intensive searching and forensic police work, but eventually, detectives make a breakthrough.
On Sunday morning, 3 weeks after Natalie had disappeared, Natalie was found by a man who was out cutting his lawn. He saw what he thought was something strange. He went over, had a look, and clearly found the body of a woman.
Her sisters Joanne and Carrie were together.
We were out in the garden and Kerry came in and she went, "Oh my God, I've got a missed call from the Flows." And I picked my phone up at the same time and I went, I have as well. And I just remember we were stood in this room and looked at each other and went, they found her. And we just knew that they'd found her.
Natalie hadn't really been concealed at all. However, it was a rural area which wouldn't be used by many people that often. She was off the road and in some kind of bushed area.
Hemming appears at Luton Crown Court charged with the murder of 31-year-old Natalie.
I can remember him at the end of that first hearing looking at me and saying, "I didn't do it, I promise." I just had to trust the process. I just had to trust that the courts would get this right.
On the 4th of November 2016, 43-year-old Paul Hemming is found guilty of the murder of Natalie Hemming.
Paul was found guilty of murder. He was also guilty of preventing a lawful burial. He was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment.
I don't think he'll ever tell the truth about what happened that night because it's the only thing he's got left that he can hold on to.
I think that's the question everyone has. Why he felt the need that, that my mum's life was his to take.
I think it's one of those things where you can allow that to eat you up and you can allow that to be the outcome of this, or you can say, okay, you have that, you need that, I don't need that. I know you did this, and that's all I need to know.
I just remember her for who she was, she used to love reading books and watching films like I did. She loved shopping. I remember her for all those things, not the sad person that she was, obviously trapped in that life. I don't think of it that way.